As Regina said earlier, today we begin a new sermon series as we go back to the book of Genesis. So for the next few weeks, we'll be reading stories about the biblical patriarchs and matriarchs. They were a family that was very connected to God, and yet they had very human problems, just like we do. So we'll be reading some of their stories to see what we can learn about how to treat people, how we can interact with our family, and how we can handle problems better. Those challenges are old as humanity itself. They were on display even in the Garden of Eden story at the very beginning of the Bible. And instead of now perfecting all of our relationships, these millennia later, we today have not quite yet achieved perfect harmony with all human beings. Indeed, it seems that we as a society might even be more rude, more disrespectful, and more unkind to others these days. So I think these stories in Genesis will have a lot to teach us. As we read them, we'll see examples of good behavior that can inspire us, as well as examples of bad behavior that will show us what not to do. They're stories of families, parents, kids, spouses, and siblings that show that even the earliest heroes of the Bible have the same problems that we do. Now, if you have never had any tension or strained relationships with anyone in your family ever, then these stories might not be very interesting to you. But if you are like most of us, then you might wrestle, now or in the past, with some relationships that have been tense or distant, painful, strained, or even sad. So we start today with Father Abraham. We start before he had many sons, but when he still had big points of tension within his family. So the verses I'll read are about his relationships with his wife Sarah and their son Isaac, as well as his oldest son Ishmael and Ishmael's mother Hagar. And like Regina mentioned, Abraham and Sarah's names got changed. I'll be reading from 2 chapters in Genesis today. And even though the earlier chapter starts with their original names, I'll go ahead and read their final names just for consistency so it doesn't get too confusing. So, here is our scripture text for the day from Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 5, and then chapter 21, verses 2, 8 through 18. Hear now the word of the Lord. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So Sarah said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarah said to Abraham, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." In chapter 21. Later, Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day that he, Isaac, was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant, listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He sent them off on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch my boy die." And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." May God bless the reading of this holy word today. Okay, so there is a lot of stuff going on in those passages. Basically, it's people being people, whether today or 3,000 years ago. We have men and women, mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, trying to make it in the world and making bad decisions. It makes me wonder, had they not heard that Garden of Eden story yet? Because it is a great bad example of what can happen when you try to craft a plan for getting ahead in the wrong way. The first mistake in our verses was made by Sarah. In chapter 16, she said, "The Lord has kept me from having children." And, well, did he? We're not sure. Or is Sarah just trying to blame somebody for life not looking the way she wanted it to? So she decides to take matters into her own hands. And if there is one reoccurring theme of the Old Testament, it's that God's hand's good, your hand's bad. If you take matters into your own hands, do the things the way that you want them to be done, just so that you can get ahead, it will not go well. The Old Testament is full of stories like that. But if you place your life in God's hands, then you will make it through, even if life doesn't look like the way you thought it was supposed to, and if it doesn't follow the schedule as perfectly as you wanted. So Sarah takes things into her own hands and tells her husband, "Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." And wow, what a terrible idea. There is no way that will go well. But Sarah's only concern is building up her household, so she thinks this must be the way to go. And yet again, things don't turn out the way Sarah expected. Her servant Hagar does get pregnant by Abraham, which makes her understandably despise Sarah. The whole situation had been forced upon her. Hagar had no choice in being Sarah's servant, just like she had no choice when she was forced to become like a concubine to Abraham and conceive a child with him. Who wouldn't despise someone after being treated that way? But Sarah, the matriarch of the household, doesn't like Hagar's resentment. And this time, she blames her husband. In chapter 16, she points her finger at Abraham and says, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering now." And again, is he really? I don't know if that's accurate either. But just like in the Garden of Eden, when humans have something that goes wrong, the first thing they do is find someone to blame. That is a truism today that stretches all the way back to the beginning of the Bible. When something goes wrong, humans look for someone else to blame. You can see it in examples in the news, in politics. I can see examples in my own home with my kids. It's a very childish thing to do. So as my kids are still growing up and maturing, they still exhibit that kind of childish behavior. So many a day, I will have one come up to me, upset, and say, I'm upset because my brother did this. Or, I'm sad because mom made me do this. Or, I'm angry at you. You ruined my day because you did this. When they say that to me, again, I always look at them and say, well, at least you have someone to blame. That's a good start. And they hate it when I say that. But I'm trying to get it into their heads that finding someone to blame does not help. The same goes for Sarah. She doesn't like the situation that she has gotten herself into. So she dumps her frustration onto Abraham, insisting that he fix everything. As the years go by, in chapter 21, Sarah is blessed with a child of her own. So they throw a big party for this one when he's about 2 or 3 years old. But at the party, Hagar's son Ishmael is seen mocking Sarah's little boy. It doesn't say how bad the situation was or what was involved. Based on the ages listed in these chapters, Ishmael would have been around 15 years old. And if there's one thing we all know teenagers do, it's that they mock all the time. Again, I get to see examples of that in my house every day with my teenager, whom I love, mocks everyone at any opportunity. The world, myself, his brother, teenagers mock all the time. So we don't know if this mocking situation was just innocent, brotherly teenage fun, or if it was something serious. We're not sure. But even though Sarah has finally received the thing that she had most longed for, a child of her own, she never let go of her bitterness and jealousy. Some folks are just like that. No matter how many good things they have or how nice you are to them, they still hold on to bitterness and don't let go. Not even a miracle blessing from God can soften their hearts. So Sarah uses any excuse that she can to make life difficult for Hagar and orders Abraham to, quote, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for they will never share in the inheritance with my son, Isaac. And again, that is terrible. So what does Abraham do? That pillar of faith, that hero of the Bible, the father of many religions and a model for generations to come, what does he do? He crumbles. He gives in. And he tosses a mother and her child out into the desert. Now he should have stood up and said, no, that's not right. I know you want me to do it, honey. I know that you're unhappy, but it's wrong. It's not the right thing to do. It's not how we should treat people. You can do what you want, but I will choose to do the right thing. That's what he should have done. But when he found himself caught in between the mothers of his two sons, he lets Sarah's anxiety sway him into doing what she wants him to do, even though it is hurtful. Have you ever felt like you were stuck in the middle of two warring parties like that? Whether friends or family? Like you were stuck in a tense, anxious relationship triangle. That's what Abraham is in. It's him, Hagar, and Sarah, and he is stuck in this tense relationship triangle. Chapter 21, verse 11 says that the whole situation distressed Abraham greatly. And I would think that's an understatement. Other Bible translations for that verse say that it pained Abraham, it grieved and upset him as he worried about his oldest son. And I should hope so. He was under pressure from his wife to kick them out into the desert, but his conscience told him that was wrong. Maybe you know how that feels too. Maybe someone has pressured you into saying or doing something that went against your conscience or good judgment, and it left you distressed or with some grief. Fortunately for Abraham, God gives him a pass this time. Even though what Sarah insists that he do is bad, God promises that Abraham's son Ishmael is still going to be okay, and will still be blessed by God, and will actually flourish later in life. Just as God plans to bless Sarah's son Isaac, God also promises to bless Hagar's son too. So when she and her son run out of water in the desert, an angel helps lead them to a well. Thank goodness for that. Thank goodness that God was looking out for Hagar and Ishmael, even though Abraham wasn't. Sarah, the matriarch, wanted them kicked out because she didn't like them. Abraham, the patriarch, felt the pressure to do something wrong. And yet, God, the Father of everyone, was watching over all of them. Despite them making bad, petulant, human decisions, they are blessed in spite of themselves by the God who sees them. Even though their immaturity led to distress and tension and put lives at risk, God's grace never stopped. And that is true today. Thank goodness. Grace never stops. Thank the Lord. There are a lot of times when we need a lot of grace. And this story shows us that there is grace even for deep, hurtful mistakes. There is grace for the selfish who hurt others. There is grace for the fearful who are manipulated. And there is grace for innocent victims. But don't take this story as an excuse to feel okay about treating others rudely or selfishly or cruelly or being manipulative. We need to do our darndest to make sure that we don't live in a way that regularly requires more grace because we are mistreating people. Do not do that. In Romans chapter 6, verse 1, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Should we go on sinning just so grace can increase? Absolutely not," he says definitively. We should, at all times, treat each other like we would want to be treated. Even though we will fail sometimes, and others will certainly fail. At different points in our lives, we might find ourselves in different positions of that triangle. We might be the one who hurts sometimes and hurts others. We might be the one who gets distressed in the middle sometimes and doesn't know what to do. Or we might find ourselves as the one who gets hurt. And yet, thank goodness, there is always grace. God provides a well in the desert for the abandoned. Angels of mercy who will reach out to you when you are at your lowest and at your wit's end. And God provides blessings available even for the self-centered, as long as they turn their hearts to the Lord, because God is always at work doing things that are bigger than all of us. So when you find yourself in any of those unfortunate positions, acknowledge it. If you have wronged or mistreated another, confess it to them and to the Lord. If you are in the middle and feeling distressed, seek God's guidance and strength to stand up for what is right. And if you have been hurt, know that God is right there with you and that God sees you and wants to provide nourishment for you in those dry desert times. No matter where you find yourself, God is watching over us all and will give us whatever we need to get through. Let us pray. Oh God, we confess that just like your patriarchs and matriarchs of old, we have treated people poorly at times. When we give in to the temptation of selfishness or fear, we are sorry that we mistreat your children. So we need and we welcome your grace. When we have done wrong, help us to acknowledge your grace to change. When we have not done what we should have, help us feel your grace for strength. And when we have been hurt, help us feel the soothing love of your grace like a well that comforts and nourishes us. In all things, in every way, in every day, may we remember that you are the God who sees us. Amen.